This is Third Paradigm, and I'm Teresa Coraggio. Today, I'd like to talk about what the agendas are of the Great Reset, and then, in opposition to that, what it is that our own agendas should be as a society and as communities. And how can we measure that? How can we measure whether they're winning or we're winning? These are things that I think we need to be thinking more clearly about and thinking analytically about so that we're understanding what it is and how it is that they're doing what they're doing, and understanding what it is that we need to do. Let's do this. From my analysis, I believe that there are three agendas of the Great Reset. The first is dispossession. The second is depopulation. And the third is psychological manipulation. Now, these aren't in order because obviously psychological manipulation is the prerequisite for the other two. But I think that there are ways that we can measure the first two more accurately and easily to be able to look at the third, which is the trickiest because people obviously don't know that they're being manipulated, and we need to show the evidence of the results before we can make that point. Now let's look at what the means are for each of those ends and what the measure would be. In the first one, dispossession, the means are economic and monopolization of energy, whether that's food monopoly or fuel monopoly. In this case, the dispossession is in two areas: home ownership and small businesses. Either of those give people control over their own lives, and the opposite of that is centralizing control over everyone else. So the measure of whether the dispossession agenda is winning is how many people own their own homes and how many people own their own businesses and their own means of making a living. Now let's look at depopulation. That also has two primary means. One is military and the other is medical, and those two things are very much intertwined. If we look at the military, we're not looking at which side wins. All we're looking at for depopulation is how many people die. So whether that's through sanctions and the results of those sanctions, or whether that is direct military action, or whether that's weaponization, because that's a huge part right now when it sounds like NATO is running out of weapons to even give Ukraine. So it doesn't matter which side wins. All that matters is how much death there is. And then if we look at the medical side of that, it's an easy thing to say. How many people have died in terms of your death rate going up or down locally? And what's your birth rate? Has your birth rate increased or has it decreased? Those are two measures that are easy to find, or should be, and give an idea of whether or not they're succeeding in this agenda. And then the prime mover of the other two, psychological manipulation. This again has two primary means. One is education and the other is media. So in education, we can look at, have the results been people who are able to think for themselves? What is the degree of gullibility in the population? That gets set by academia, and our entire school system serves college and university systems that have been found to be the ones where certain ideologies start. For instance, an article on wokeism and how wokeism started at the academic level way back decades ago and has only reached the social media level in recent times. So that's the direction in which ideologies are funded and are promoted and made into something that creates a system of brainwashing. There's really no other word for it. Now let's look at what our agenda is. Any society has the function of supporting its communities because communities are the building block of a society. And for a community, its goal is to support families because families are the smallest unit of community. They are where community starts. And any system that you have should be able to scale up or scale down. If it doesn't work at the family level, if the goals aren't the same at the family level, it's not going to work at a society level. So let's look at what the inverse of each of those programs are. The opposite of dispossession is self-reliance. And no one can be self-reliant unless they have the means of being able to provide security for themselves. Security comes in knowing that you have a place where you belong, where you can't be kicked out. And it also means being able to be part of a community and knowing that you have a place in that community. And then it looks at controlling the means of making a living and having that be something that's under your own control. So if we look at the measures of how many homeowners there are in a community, what's the percentage of people who are homeowners? Then we can look at that measure. We can also look at the number of businesses, independent businesses, and have those numbers gone up or down since the pandemic and all of the lockdowns and different agendas that have happened since then. Now let's look at the opposite of depopulation. That's not population for population's sake. Quantity is not quality. That means a system of reciprocity in which you're enhancing the well-being of people through making sure that they're taking care of each other. It's not a centralized system of social welfare. So this is something that we can do through an economic means that encourages a trade and reciprocity at the local level and that helps us to be producing for ourselves and taking care of each other. And then the opposite of psychological manipulation is the ability to think critically and create new meaning, which I'm going to call creativity, because I don't think creativity is just novelty. I think that it has to have the element of bringing new meaning out of something, having that synergy of recognizing, oh, this is what I've been looking for. This is the way that these things fit. Without that aha moment, I don't think that it's ever real creativity. So that's our purpose, is the regeneration and the generosity of bringing about what's new and what creates new meaning. Let's look at the system that we live under now in the U.S. and in all countries that have that centralized banking system under the Bank of International Settlements, the BIS, and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. What we're living under is the worst of both worlds. It's where bankers have usurped the authority of government to create the money and proactively then are organizing labor in their own interest. But what they've left the shell government with is the responsibility for taking care of the people. And so the guilt and the obligations of that are left with taxpayers. And so we're squeezed from both ends. That on the one hand, we spend our labor serving the interest of the bankers in order to make our mortgages, which is how the money is created. And we serve them in their other guise as corporate boards. So we're spending most of our labor there. And then with our little crumbs of taxes, we're obligated to clean up their mess, to take all of the destruction and hardship and sickness and death and everything that they've created, the poverty that they've induced, and then we have the obligation to then make it better or be seen as selfish people. These two systems are intertwined like DNA, corporatocracy and the social welfare systems. We need to untangle those and look at our responsibility to create systems that are enabling people to take responsibility for themselves and communities to take responsibility for each other. In the system that we want to create, there are 3 different economies that I think are needed in order to counterbalance that. One is an economy of subsistence, of self-reliance, something that is encouraging people to be as self-reliant as possible, particularly in the necessities of things like food. The second economy is one that encourages the self-reliance of communities through reciprocity, through trade. And this is looking at services and being able to provide locally made goods. Those are things that are backed by what I call the carrot system, which is a digital community currency that is backed by the mortgages. The third economy is one that encourages creativity and communication and cultural exchange. And that's one that I think is so fun that it could operate as a gift economy, something in which gratitude is the coin of the realm. I think that we have ways that we can facilitate that, and that this is what we all want to be doing. This is why we exist. It's why we have our subsistence economy. It's why we have our reciprocal economy within our communities, so that we can bring out the best in every person and then be able to let that shine. I've been talking with a viewer named Dr. Hammer, who I met on a very fun Substack called Guttermouth, about the different types of economies and differentiating what I'm looking at creating from what is now. I think you can give an example with a kindergarten class. So you take a kindergarten class and you want to demonstrate how money works and how trade works. And so you start by giving one of the students all of the money. They have all of the tokens that are for trade. And then you're going to start having people making different things and trading them with each other. What's going to happen? That student ends up monopolizing everything. Now let's look at it a little different. You give everyone an equal amount, but you give one student all the desks, and they can charge rent for you to sit in that desk. Once again, you start this trade. All that will happen is that everyone ends up producing for that one student. So this has been looked at in sociology texts, where they say that if you have 100 men on an island, which of course is only going to be one generation of men, that you give one person all of the money, or you give one person all of the land, and the result will always be the same. So that's what we need to change, not to abolish trade or to not have a unit of trade. Money is a brilliant invention. It's just being used for the wrong purpose, and we can use it better than they can. And my last point is making this transition. I say that you catch as many flies as possible with honey, that you give incentives, because what we're looking at is trying to reverse the flow of extraction that happens with corporations. That corporations, their model is for profit. That means that they are extractive by their nature and predatory at the worst. So I think looking at whether they are merely extractive or predatory is an important thing in terms of deciding whether you even want to let them operate in your community. But even if they're extractive, what you want to do is reverse that flow. You don't want to kick them out. Every person who's working in your community for a corporation and managing to make a decent living, you should encourage, because they're just going to help you build up your dollar reserves or whatever your imperial currency is where you live. So you want to do that, but you also want to give those people bribes. And my system has 4 bribes and only 1 downside. So for the people who are working and who are bringing in that kind of currency that you're going to need to be able to have an exchange rate so that you can make sure that you can take advantage of everything that's out there under that currency, because you're a long way from self-reliant at this point. If you have those people, you can offer them first the ability to refinance their existing mortgage or buy a new house at 3% interest. Then you can offer them 3% interest on all of their long-term savings. So you can give everyone in your community that benefit of being able to save for retirement, to save for a down payment on a house. The third bribe is that every resident is a shareholder in that community bank, because you as government have taken back the function of banking that is your most important function, because it enables you to do everything else. So as a shareholder in that bank, and someone whose mortgage may be supporting that also, you're going to thank all of your shareholders by giving them dividends, monthly dividends that are in the form of targeted subsidies. So I look at these as being in locally produced food, in well care, in education, and in home improvements. The fourth bribe is that you're going to allow them to trade in a certain number of dollars or euros or whatever currency for your carrots so that they can be free of all income tax and free of all sales tax whenever they're spent locally. The only tax on that is going to be really a retirement contribution to the community pension, so equal to the Social Security contribution now. That's going to keep your community thriving, and it's going to give them a 2-to-1 benefit, because anyone coming in from the outside with dollars or euros is going to have to pay twice as much for housing. So that gives your local residents a 2-to-1 advantage as consumers, especially consumers of local housing. But you also want to give them a 2-to-1 advantage as producers. And that's where the one downside comes in, that any money that is extracted that ends up being exchanged for that imperial currency should be taxed at least 50%, because that way you're also going to be saving your production and making sure that someone can't come in and extract those dollars either through rents or through using your resources and your labor in order to produce things that they're exporting. You don't want to allow that to happen, because you want to support your own people. There is obviously a lot of distance between we can't change the system and if you can't explain how to change the system in 15 minutes, it must not work. So if you want to do more research, do some homework on this. Here is a video on reversing the reset, and here is a playlist that looks at the different Great Reset agendas and how they've done what they've done. This will be up on Substack that will have links and text. If anyone has a good app for transcribing, that would help me do this a little faster. Thank you.